So this is a painting that I started last week. It's really dry right now. I was working on some of the bigger areas like the sky in the back is what I first did. I'm pretty happy with that. There's a few places where I want to wait till it's totally dry to do any more details, like some of these star glows that I'm kind of playing with, and then I haven't decided if I'm going to leave this as a blood moon or not. I also did this. So the reason why I kind of was able to go right from the background to the foreground like that and sort of avoid the subject matter is because after the sky is done and it's laying back behind my subject matter, I'm able to just go into the foreground because the foreground doesn't really interfere with the subject. The subjects are kind of, if you can kind of like put your arm across like that, you can see it's pretty separate. So in this case, I was kind of able to violate that rule of, every time you come back to a painting, you work background, middle ground, and foreground, right? So that's kind of what happened there. But when I'm trying to go back to a painting that's already largely dry, the biggest thing about starting that is restructuring your palette as closely as you can get it, then looking at your references and seeing what your lighter areas or darker areas and where are they and how can they be more developed, right? So once you have your palette restructured, what I do is I take a brush. I'm kind of working in smaller areas on the coyotes, so I started just kind of with this stiffer brush. The nice thing about using a stiffer brush on a dry painting is you're able to rub the painting a little harder. And this is a pretty common technique. Actually, it's called rubbing or scrubbing, and this technique I feel is most useful on a dry painting like this because you can create a blended look when obviously you can't blend into wet paint. So what I'm doing here is I have some of this brownish grayish mixture for the dogs, and now I can, without touching my wet foreground now, see it's not always a good idea for sort of technical reasons, but anyway, so now I can put this in, but this paint without any paint thinner or any liquid will rub across this surface, and through its virtue of just being transparent and thin, yields a blended look, right? It looks like maybe I did this while it was wet, right? Because in oil painting, much of the best effects we can get are done while it's wet, right? So even though it is dry, I'm sort of accomplishing a look that appears like I could have this could have been done while the whole thing was wet, right? And I can go through each of these guys and just sort of rub a little bit of this color in, and it doesn't look weird, right? Because I've restructured my palette closely enough to what this is. If I didn't have the right color, this would look super weird, right? And it wouldn't necessarily look as blended. I mean, the color matching is definitely a big part of it, but when you're going back over a dry painting, rubbing or scrubbing, as it's sometimes called, is a really good technique for oil painting. To go back to a dry painting and still have that wet look.